January 17, 1991. 2:38 a.m. The Persian Gulf is silent. No warning sirens. No bomber formations. No fleets on the horizon. Then steel hatches snap open. One by one, missiles rise from the decks of American warships, climbing into the darkness before vanishing toward Iraq. Not supersonic. Not screaming. Just steady. For years, Soviet naval officers mocked the Tomahawk. Too slow. Too easy to stop. But less than an hour later, 288 of them slam into Baghdad with surgical precision. Blinding radar, collapsing command centers, and rewriting modern warfare in a single night. The laughter stopped that morning, and naval warfare would never be the same. January 17, 1991. 2:38 a.m. Persian Gulf. The sea is black glass under a moonless sky. No navigation lights. No silhouettes. Just the faint phosphorescent curl of water breaking along a steel hull. On the bridge of USS San Jacinto, CG-56, Captain Thomas R. Halsey stands motionless, binoculars lowered, headset tight against his ears. Around him, consoles glow green in the darkness. Radar scopes sweep in silent arcs. Below deck, in the Combat Information Center, air conditioning hums over the quiet tension of men who know history is about to pivot. Execute launch sequence. Comes the order. There is no thunderous gun blast. No dramatic recoil. Just a muffled mechanical cough from the forward vertical launch system. Then the deck hatches bloom open like steel petals. A single cylinder erupts upward in a burst of white fire, a BGM-109 Tomahawk land attack missile. For a split second it climbs vertically, suspended in its own exhaust plume. Then it tips, nose angling toward the dark western horizon. And the night ignites. One after another, cells flare. White lances of flame stab skyward in precise rhythm. The cruiser barely shudders as missile after missile clears the deck, ignites its turbofan, and disappears into the black over Saudi Arabia. 288 missiles will launch tonight. From ships, from submarines, from a fleet the Iraqi Navy cannot see, and the Soviet Navy once dismissed. 3 years earlier, 1988, Moscow. In a windowless conference room inside the Soviet Naval General Staff Building, Vice Admiral Viktor Chernovin studies a grainy intelligence photograph projected onto a wall. An American Ticonderoga-class cruiser at sea. Boxes forward. Boxes aft. Cruise missiles, an analyst says. Chernovin exhales through his nose. Subsonic. He taps the table with a pencil. 800 kilometers per hour. Like an airliner. A murmur of agreement ripples across the room. Soviet doctrine warships speed. The P-500 Basalt. The P-700 Granite. Supersonic anti-ship missiles built to smash carrier groups in minutes. Massive. Loud. Terrifying. The American Tomahawk is different. Small. Slow. Terrain following. An admiral in the back of the room smirks. It will take hours to reach its target. Another adds. And if detected, easily destroyed. Laughter, muted but confident. In their models, war is decided by salvos of supersonic steel tearing through fleets. Not by quiet machines creeping at treetop height. They underestimate something fundamental. Precision. 2:44 a.m. Persian Gulf. In the torpedo room of USS Louisville, SSN 724, Commander Michael Haskins grips the periscope handles, though the submarine is deep below the surface. His boat has already fired its load. 12 Tomahawks. They are gone now, expelled by compressed air, rising silently toward the surface before their rocket boosters ignite. No surface radar saw the submarine. No coastal patrol heard it. The Tomahawks have wings. As each missile clears the sea, its solid rocket booster burns for seconds, then falls away. A turbofan engine, a Williams F-107, inhales night air. The missile levels at 200 feet. Then lower, 50 feet, 30. Over the desert, they descend further, guided not by radio commands but by maps stored in silicon. Turcom, terrain contour matching. The missile compares the ground beneath it to preloaded elevation data. Hills, wadis, highway overpasses, corrects itself constantly. No pilot breathes inside. No radio crackles. Just a guidance computer making thousands of micro-adjustments per second. In Baghdad, the air defense network waits for bombers. Iraqi radar operators stare at scopes tuned for high-altitude intruders, B-52s, F-111s, F-15Es. They do not see what is skimming below their radar horizon. 2:58 a.m., Riyadh Air Operations Center. Lieutenant Colonel Mark Wetherington watches digital icons crawl across a projection screen. Each represents a Tomahawk in flight. Time on target? Someone asks. 34 minutes. The room smells of coffee and warm circuitry. Coalition planners have spent months feeding coordinates into mission planners, Iraqi power stations, communications hubs, air defense nodes, command bunkers beneath Baghdad. The Tomahawk carries a 1,000-pound unitary warhead. It is not built to terrorize a city indiscriminately. It is built to punch a door through a specific wall. Wetherington thinks about the skepticism he heard years earlier during joint briefings. Analysts arguing that cruise missiles were too slow, too limited. Good for harassment, not decisive. He watches the digital tracks advance. 288 quiet arguments crossing a border. 3:19 a.m. Baghdad. The first explosion is surgical. At the Al-Taji Air Defense Sector north of the capital, a radar array vanishes in a flash of white-orange light. The blast wave ripples outward, flattening antennae, shattering glass kilometers away. Seconds later, another impact. Then another. Across the city, power substations erupt. Telecommunications nodes collapse into twisted steel. Surface-to-air missile batteries SA-2, SA-3, SA-6 lose coordination as command links disintegrate. Iraqi anti-aircraft guns begin firing blindly into the sky, tracers arcing upward in frantic patterns. But there are no bombers above them. The missiles are already past. One Tomahawk approaches the Ministry of Defense complex at rooftop height, weaving between buildings, its radar altimeter feeding constant data to the flight computer. Inside the building, Colonel Hassan al-Takriti hears a distant, rising whine. He has seconds to wonder what it is. The missile strikes precisely at the pre-programmed aim point, a reinforced communications wing, detonating inside before the structure collapses inward like a kicked-in door. Not random, not scattered, perfectly sequenced. Across Baghdad, 288 impacts land within tightly calculated windows, synchronized with stealth aircraft strikes and electronic warfare. The sky is chaos. The ground targets are not. 4:02 a.m. Persian Gulf. On the bridge of USS San Jacinto, Captain Halsey listens to encrypted updates. Primary targets reporting destruction. He allows himself one slow nod. The sea remains calm. No Iraqi missile boats approach. No counterstrike materializes from the horizon. Hundreds of miles away, a capital city has been systematically disassembled in under an hour, not by massed bomber formations alone, but by weapons once dismissed as too slow to matter. Somewhere in Moscow, analysts will soon be studying satellite imagery of Baghdad's smoking infrastructure. They will not be laughing. January 17, 1991. 6:40 a.m. Moscow. Dawn struggles through a gray winter sky, turning the Moskva River into a ribbon of dull steel. Inside the Soviet Ministry of Defense, fluorescent lights hum over a long polished table scarred by decades of briefings and crises. Vice Admiral Viktor Chernovin stands at the head of the room again. But this time, no one is smirking. Satellite photographs are spread across the table. Fresh prints, edges still curling. Baghdad from orbit. Blackened rectangles where radar sites once stood. Burned-out transformer yards. Collapsed communications buildings. A colonel from naval intelligence adjusts his glasses. 288 launches confirmed, he says quietly. Surface ships and submarines. Coordinated. Arrival window under 40 minutes. Chernovin studies the images. The destruction is not random. Not the carpeted devastation of World War II bombing campaigns. It is patterned. Surgical voids in the Iraqi command and control grid. They blinded the network first, the colonel continues. Air defense coordination degraded before manned aircraft penetrated central sectors. A younger officer shifts uneasily. Our previous assessment assumed interception would be likely if detected. Chernovin does not look at him. If detected, he repeats. No one answers. They all know what the footage from CNN has already shown. Baghdad's skyline lit by tracers firing wildly into empty air, while something invisible dismantled the backbone of its defenses. The Tomahawk did not outrun Iraqi radar. It slipped beneath it. 3:27 a.m. Baghdad, local time. At the Iraqi Air Defense Operations Center, Major General Abdul Rahman al-Duri grips a headset slick with sweat. Where are the bombers? He demands. Reports flood in: radar failures, severed communications, transformer stations exploding without warning. Sector commanders shouting that they are blind. A radar technician pounds the side of his console. Sir. Low altitude returns. Intermittent. Then his screen goes black. Another impact shakes the building. Ceiling tiles cascade downward in white fragments. The Iraqi system was designed to fight waves of high-altitude attackers, Soviet-built interceptors guided toward visible targets. The SA-2 and SA-3 batteries expect arcs descending from above. They were never meant to defend against a machine flying 30 meters above the ground, curving through river valleys and highway corridors, arriving without a pilot to hesitate. By the time manned coalition aircraft cross into central Iraq, key nodes are already silent. The Tomahawks have opened the door. Aboard USS Wisconsin, BB-64, Persian Gulf. The old battleship feels like an anachronism. 16-inch guns that once thundered across the Pacific now sharing a deck with modern missile launchers bolted onto its superstructure. At 2:45 a.m., Wisconsin added her voice to the night. Tomahawks rising from a ship designed in the 1940s. Petty Officer Daniel Ruiz remembers the glow reflecting off the sea. The smell of burnt propellant drifting across a deck once stained with powder from a different era. He leans against a bulkhead now, listening to distant updates over internal speakers. Initial battle damage assessment indicates multiple primary targets destroyed. He thinks about how quiet it was. No recoil slamming through the hull like the old guns. Just hatches opening and controlled bursts of flame. War has changed its sound. Back in Moscow, a projector flickers to life, showing infrared satellite passes from the early morning hours. Bright flashes marking impacts across Baghdad's infrastructure grid. An air defense specialist clears his throat. Our layered defense doctrine relies on early detection and interception at range. The Americans appear to have neutralized key radar sites before mass air penetration. He hesitates. If such a strike were conducted against us, the sentence hangs unfinished. The room is suddenly very small. Soviet naval doctrine has long emphasized overwhelming carrier battle groups with supersonic anti-ship missiles. Massive salvos intended to saturate defenses in minutes. Speed as survival. But the Americans have demonstrated something different. Persistence. Endurance. The ability to launch from hundreds of kilometers away, from platforms difficult to track, and hit fixed infrastructure with meter-level accuracy. A senior analyst flips to another photo. This bunker, he says, pointing to a collapsed structure in Baghdad. Hardened concrete. Penetrated at entry point. Chernovin studies the impact crater, centered almost geometrically on a roof seam. Not luck. Programming. He finally speaks. We assumed slowness equaled vulnerability. No one corrects him. Outside, Moscow traffic begins its morning crawl. Civilians heading to work. Vendors opening kiosks. The Cold War is technically thawing, but no one in this room mistakes what they have witnessed. The Americans have demonstrated that naval power can reach deep inland without aircraft carriers approaching hostile shores. Without warning. Without pilots at risk. 3:51 a.m. Central Baghdad. Another Tomahawk threads between apartment blocks, its guidance system comparing real-time terrain data to digital maps loaded weeks earlier aboard a ship in the Gulf. It approaches the Iraqi telecommunications center. Inside, engineers scramble to reroute signals as systems fail one after another. One man steps to a window at the sound, a low mechanical growl building from the distance. He sees nothing. The missile clears the rooftop by meters. Then it dives slightly, aligning with a pre-selected structural seam. The impact folds steel and concrete inward. Fire blossoms briefly, then smoke pours upward into a sky already streaked with anti-aircraft tracers chasing ghosts. Elsewhere, F-117 Nighthawks slip through corridors carved open by those earlier strikes, delivering precision-guided bombs onto leadership compounds and additional command nodes. The choreography is deliberate. Cruise missiles first, stealth aircraft second, conventional air power third, layer upon layer. The Tomahawk was never meant to win a war alone. It was meant to begin one on its own terms. Moscow, 8:12 a.m. The briefing ends in near silence. Officers gather their papers. Chairs scrape against polished floors. Chernovin lingers by the window, staring out at the winter skyline. He remembers the laughter in the same room 3 years earlier, jokes about subsonic cruise missiles crawling toward targets for hours, easy prey for prepared defenses. Baghdad was prepared. On paper. He turns back to the table and taps one of the satellite images with a single finger. Speed, he says quietly, is not the only measure of power. No one laughs this time. 1991. 9:30 a.m. Arlington, Virginia. Inside a secure conference room at the Pentagon, a playback monitor flickers with grainy reconnaissance footage. Analysts lean forward as frame-by-frame imagery confirms impact points across Baghdad. Dr. William Harper, a civilian engineer who helped refine the Tomahawk's guidance software, folds his arms tightly across his chest. For years, critics called it an expensive experiment. Too slow, too delicate, too dependent on maps and satellites that could fail. He watches a freeze frame of a destroyed Iraqi command bunker. The impact crater sits almost perfectly centered over the designated aim point. Harper exhales. Turcom performed within tolerance, he murmurs. Across the room, a Navy captain nods. And DSMAC confirmation locked final phase. Digital scene matching area correlation, the missile's terminal eye. In its last miles, the Tomahawk compared live imagery of its target to stored reference photographs. Buildings, intersections, rooftop geometry. If the scene matched, it struck. If it didn't, it corrected. This was not speed. This was memory. 3:05 a.m. Iraqi Western Desert. A lone Iraqi radar station scans empty skies near the Jordanian border. The operator sips bitter tea, eyes drifting across a green scope that shows nothing but static returns from distant terrain. What he cannot see is curvature. Radar beams travel in straight lines. The Earth does not. Flying at 100 feet above the ground, a Tomahawk remains below that invisible horizon until it is nearly overhead. By the time the radar wave finally touches its fuselage, the missile is seconds away. Too little time for meaningful interception. One technician notices a faint flicker. Low return. The missile passes before he can finish the sentence. Moments later, the radar dish disintegrates in a controlled blast that folds its support structure inward like collapsing scaffolding. Silence replaces the steady sweep tone. Persian Gulf. USS Bunker Hill, CG-52. Commander Lisa Moreno stands over a chart table marked with grease pencil arcs. Each arc represents a pre-programmed route, carefully plotted to avoid heavily defended sectors, exploiting river valleys and terrain masking. The missiles did not fly straight lines. They bent around obstacles. Each launch required hours of mission planning. Satellite imagery stitched together. Elevation maps digitized. Threat rings calculated. Moreno remembers early exercises in the 1980s when guidance errors sent test missiles miles off course. Critics inside the Navy questioned whether such complexity could survive real combat. Tonight it did. A communications officer hands her an update sheet. Impact confirmations continue to align within projected CEP. Circular error probable, the radius within which half the missiles are expected to land. The numbers are tight. Moreno studies the Persian Gulf horizon through reinforced glass. Calm water. No visible enemy fleet. No dramatic exchange of naval gunfire. And yet, hundreds of miles inland, infrastructure is burning. Naval power has detached itself from coastlines. Moscow. Afternoon briefing. A Soviet electronics specialist sketches quickly on a chalkboard. He draws a radar site. Then he draws a curved line beneath it, the Earth's surface. Low-altitude penetration reduces detection range drastically, he explains. At 30 meters altitude, radar warning may be less than 30 kilometers. He underlines the figure. At 800 kilometers per hour, reaction time under 2 minutes. A general frowns. But interception requires continuous tracking, coordination, power, communications. He gestures toward the satellite photos of Baghdad's damaged grid. They removed those first. The room absorbs the implication. The Tomahawk was not merely a projectile. It was part of a system: reconnaissance satellites, digital mapping, stealth aircraft, electronic jamming. Each piece reinforcing the others. Soviet planners had focused on speed to overwhelm defenses. The Americans focused on sequencing to dismantle them. 3:33 a.m. Baghdad outskirts. A Tomahawk cruises low over the Tigris River, its reflection briefly shimmering on dark water. Civilians below hear only a faint mechanical hum, mistaken by some for a distant generator or truck engine. The missile banks slightly, following a waypoint programmed weeks earlier aboard a cruiser in the Gulf. Inside its fuselage, gyroscopes spin. Accelerometers measure subtle shifts. The guidance computer cross-checks terrain elevation against stored contour data. It is not improvising. It is executing. Ahead lies an electrical distribution hub feeding multiple military installations. Without it, backup generators must activate slower, less coordinated. The missile descends. Its warhead detonates inside the substation yard, transformers rupturing in synchronized flashes. Across sectors of Baghdad, lights flicker. Commanders shout into radios that no longer connect. Air defense batteries lose centralized control. In the darkness and confusion, coalition aircraft slip deeper into Iraqi airspace. Pentagon. Midday. Harper remains standing long after most officers have left. He thinks back to 1983, the first operational deployments. Congressional skepticism. Budget fights. Questions about whether a cruise missile could ever justify its cost. Now the proof glows across reconnaissance screens. 288 launches, coordinated from ships and submarines that never crossed into hostile coastal waters. No American pilot captured. No formation detected in advance. He whispers to himself, almost incredulous. They thought it was slow. Moscow. Evening. Vice Admiral Chernovin reviews a translated U.S. press briefing. American officials describe precision engagement and minimal collateral damage. He does not care about the phrasing. He cares about capability. If cruise missiles can reliably strike fixed infrastructure from standoff range, then ports, airfields, radar arrays, even command bunkers are vulnerable long before conventional forces engage. He folds the briefing slowly. The age of measuring power solely by how fast a missile travels is ending. Accuracy, integration, invisibility, these are harder to counter. Outside, snow begins to fall over Moscow. Inside, Soviet doctrine begins to shift. January 18, 1991. 4:12 a.m. Baghdad. Smoke hangs low over the city, trapped by cold night air. Fires burn in controlled clusters, not citywide infernos, but precise wounds in steel and concrete. At the Iraqi General Command bunker, emergency generators thrum unevenly. Colonel Hassan Al-Takriti steps over broken glass as engineers attempt to re-establish communication with sector commanders. Southern Air Defense reports no contact. An aide shouts. Because they are blind, Hassan snaps. He knows now what happened. The attacks did not aim to destroy everything. They aimed to disconnect everything. Radar nodes struck first. Power grids feeding command centers next. Telecommunications hubs shattered in sequence. The pattern is undeniable. The Americans dismantled the nervous system before attacking the body. Outside, anti-aircraft guns still fire sporadically into the sky, reflex without coordination. Gunners track nothing. They shoot at sound, at rumor, at memory. But the first wave of Tomahawks is long gone. Persian Gulf. USS San Jacinto. Captain Halsey stands alone on the weather deck as the eastern horizon begins to pale. The launch cells are sealed again, steel flush with the deck as if nothing happened. He thinks about the paradox. The missiles traveled over 1,000 kilometers. They flew for more than an hour. They crossed deserts, rivers, cities. Yet the ships that launched them never came under fire. No Iraqi patrol boats approached. No coastal batteries answered. Naval warfare has always been about closing distance. Fleets maneuvering to bring guns or torpedoes within range. Last night, range became irrelevant. The ocean was no longer a boundary. It was a launch platform. Moscow, January 19th. Naval Research Directorate. Engineers cluster around disassembled components of a Soviet Kh-55 cruise missile, their own subsonic design, originally intended for strategic nuclear delivery. An older designer, Sergei Antonovich, rubs his chin thoughtfully. They used conventional warheads, he says. A younger engineer nods. High-precision targeting. Infrastructure suppression. Antonovich looks up sharply. We designed ours for deterrence. They are designing for daily war. The distinction is subtle but profound. Soviet cruise missile doctrine centers on strategic exchange, nuclear payloads as instruments of escalation. The Americans just demonstrated something different. Precision conventional strike from standoff range, usable without triggering global annihilation. A colonel from the general staff flips through reconnaissance summaries. They synchronized cruise missile strikes with stealth aircraft, he notes. Layered disruption. Antonovich studies the Kh-55 casing. It is not enough to fly far, he says quietly. It must arrive exactly where intended. Washington, D.C., January 20th. At a press briefing, defense officials display footage of missile launches from ships at night, columns of fire lifting silently from dark decks. A reporter asks, why not rely solely on aircraft? A Navy admiral answers carefully. Cruise missiles allow us to strike heavily defended targets without risking aircrew. They suppress air defenses before pilots enter contested airspace. The admiral does not mention Moscow. He does not mention that adversaries around the world are watching. But they are. In Beijing, in Tehran, in Pyongyang, and especially in a rapidly changing Soviet Union where budgets are tightening and doctrine is under scrutiny. The message is unmistakable. American naval forces can reach deep inland precisely without massing visible forces offshore. Baghdad, January 21st. Coalition aircraft now dominate the skies. With key radar nodes destroyed and command networks fractured, Iraqi air defense struggles to coordinate. An SA-6 battery attempts to track an F-15E Strike Eagle approaching from medium altitude. The radar flickers, struggling with intermittent power. Communications with Sector Command are delayed. Moments later, the Strike Eagle releases precision-guided munitions onto a hardened aircraft shelter. The Tomahawks did not win the air war. They made it possible. Each cruise missile that struck in the opening hours carved a corridor through which manned aircraft could flow with reduced risk. In military academies, this will later be called shock and awe. But on the ground, it feels like confusion, like trying to fight with severed nerves. Moscow, February 1991. Vice Admiral Chernovin presents a closed-door assessment to senior leadership. The United States has demonstrated a credible conventional long-range precision strike capability from maritime platforms, he says evenly. Slides click behind him, impact maps, launch estimates, flight profiles. Subsonic speed did not prevent mission success. Low-altitude penetration and preemptive destruction of detection nodes reduced interception probability. Politburo member leans forward. What does this mean for us? Chernovin pauses. It means that fixed infrastructure within range of hostile naval forces cannot assume warning time sufficient for response. Silence. The Cold War is unraveling politically, but militarily the lesson is stark. Surface fleets and submarines armed with precision cruise missiles can reshape a battlefield before armies even move. Doctrine must adapt. Budgets must adapt. Defenses must adapt. Because laughter is no longer an option. Persian Gulf. Late February. On the deck of USS Wisconsin, Petty Officer Ruiz watches another Tomahawk launch during a follow-up strike. The flame reflects in his eyes. This time, there is less tension, more certainty. He remembers hearing stories about Soviet analysts dismissing the missile as too slow, too fragile. He smiles faintly. The missile arcs upward, booster falling away as its wings deploy. Then it levels, vanishing into darkness once more. Not fast, not loud, just inevitable. Years later, military historians will mark January 17, 1991, as a turning point. Not because 288 missiles destroyed a city, but because they demonstrated that precision, integration, and reach could redefine naval warfare. Speed still matters. Mass still matters. But the night the sea opened fire proved something else entirely. Power is not always measured in how fast you arrive. Sometimes it is measured in how precisely you land.